This has to be one of the most interesting mowers I've had the pleasure of working on. It's really unique and it's certainly not your typical lawnmower, which I can appreciate. However, just because you're the most interesting thing in the room doesn't mean you don't have a few nasty surprises to offer, and I might be taking back all the nice words I just mentioned. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this John Deere lawnmower with the coolest wheels I've ever seen, and the problem is that the pull rope is really tough to pull and it basically gets stuck. Now, I thought this was going to be an easy fix because it's nothing too unusual, but as you'll see here in a bit, this mower had a secret, and to be honest, I really can't explain it. Now, I'm going to try and repair this mower, but yours might be different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it. I'll be glad to answer your questions. Now, there are a few extra items I need to address, and hopefully it won't turn into anything too serious. The reason why is because the price of parts for this John Deere mower is apparently based on the weight of gold, so I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that I don't have to replace anything. In the last video on this mower, we did some basic maintenance to the front casters, but we didn't look at the locking system for it, so that's one of the extra items we need to address. Now, for those of you who didn't know, the lock is meant to keep one of the casters from being able to turn. This will allow you to keep a straight line while mowing when you don't need to utilize the extreme maneuverability that the casters offer. Now, at the moment, the lever that activates the lock doesn't seem to work like it should be, and I will say one thing, trying to keep a straight line without the caster lock is a bit tough to do, so having this working would be fantastic. So as far as the main issue with the rope being tough to pull, I'm going to guess that the valve lash might be out of tolerance and more than likely by a lot too. It's interesting though, when I first got this mower from the county dump, it seemed to be well taken care of, so it's kind of strange that they didn't know how to check the valve lash. There is one other possible cause for this issue, and that is a partially sheared flywheel key. So just to keep from having any nagging uncertainty, we'll have to inspect that as well. So surprisingly, the first pull was okay, but on the second one, it stopped, and now it's really tough to pull. The first item I want to check is the flywheel key, which is of course under all the covers on top of the engine, which means we need to take off quite a bit of stuff. We'll save checking on the valve lash for last, since I think it's the most likely suspect, that and I need to know if I was right about the key not being the culprit. Now, I do want to mention that I have not cleaned this mower since I picked it up. I did clean the wheels because that's the part I was dealing with in the last video, but I have not looked under the covers just yet. That means as I get down to the flywheel, I'm going to do some cleaning at the same time. Now, this is mainly done to keep my hands from looking gross while working and filming, but if you don't want to clean yours, well, that's your choice. I do want to talk about something that I mentioned in the last video. When I first got this mower, there really didn't seem to be anything wrong with it. In fact, I had it running at one point, however, that was some time ago. It was only recently when I started the video series on this mower that it started to have some serious issues. So at first, I really wasn't sure how I was going to present this mower as a project, but it turned into questioning the usability of the front casters. But after some time, it started to have some issues creeping up on it, which is not a typical thing to happen with these mowers, so this was very surprising to me. Now, there was gasoline in the tank, and for some reason, I didn't drain it to examine it. My best guess as to the reason why was because since it started and ran, I didn't think it was necessary. However, by the end of this video, I'll be second guessing myself and possibly even kicking myself too. The reason why is because it would have been so easy to have just let the fuel drain out into a bowl after disconnecting the fuel line. That's okay, it's easy enough to do later on, although missed opportunities do bother me a bit. I also recently had my first fuel line issue come up, so this would have been a great time to replace that as well. Also, in the later video, I'm going to show you what the inside of these Briggs fuel tanks look like and tell you some interesting facts about them. So what's coming up is the big reveal, and what I mean by that is that you never know what's underneath these recoils. It could be a rat's nest made from grass or fabric, or in this case, it could turn out to be mud dauber nests. Unfortunately, this tells me that more than likely this mower was not used for quite some time, at least a year or so. There's also quite a bit of dirt that's turned into mud after having sprayed some water on it, which is not going to help an air-cooled engine. So here's the deal, if you've been watching either of my channels for quite a while, you'll notice that I'm always cleaning stuff, but why? Is it because I need to have stuff cleaned? Now the answer is no. The reason why is because the mowers that are a few years old have probably never been cleaned before, and that's why I clean them. You don't need to do this every year, but every 3 to 4 years is probably best, and less often if you don't mow areas that are basically dirt. Now, any amount of dirt that's around the cylinder head or on the cooling fins will keep these areas hotter than they should be, so to keep your engine from overheating, it's best to clean any of the dirt off. Now, if you don't really have the time or just don't care to maintain your mower, then why bother? But if you don't want to buy a mower every few years, then doing a bit of cleaning would help out a lot. Once we finally clean all the dirt off, it's finally time to get to the flywheel key, which is right under the starter cup. Now, once the starter cup is out of the way, you should be able to see the keyway in the crankshaft and the flywheel along with the top of the key. Now, the key should be lined up in the flywheel and the crankshaft, and it's pretty obvious that this one is lined up, so that means it's not sheared, and the cause for the rope issue is more than likely related to the valve lash. That means we can put the starter cup back onto the crankshaft, and while I'm here, I'm also going to do a bit more maintenance to the flywheel brake, which is also part of the ground to turn off the ignition coil. It's the same maintenance schedule for this part as cleaning your mower. You don't need to do it very often, just once in a while, and in the case for this engine, it's probably never been done before. And since I've got the can of lube in our hands right now, I might as well use it on the locking system for the caster. Now, as you can see, the lever does move, but it's not moving as much as it should be. It could be the cable that's stuck or the pivot for the lever. But after spraying both parts, it's now moving a lot better, and it's now engaging the lock onto the roll pin on top of the caster, just like it's supposed to. Now that the caster lock is fixed, it's finally time to get to the valve lash, and to make it easier to rotate the engine, I'm going to take out the spark plug. And since the plug will be out of the engine, I also want to take the opportunity to use my compression tester on it, just to find out how worn out the engine might be. Now, I want to see a reading in the 150 psi range, but I'd gladly take anything over 100 because it'll still have plenty of power in that range. We do not want to see a reading below 90 psi because it could mean the engine is showing signs of wear on it. However, once I got the plug out of the engine, I didn't like what I was seeing. It would appear that the plug is wet with oil and gasoline, which means our issue could be hydrolocking because of the fluid in the combustion chamber. So before I do the test, I want to spin the engine over and see if anything comes out of the spark plug opening. Well, I wasn't expecting that to happen, and if I was, I would have moved the camera out of the way. I'll move it a bit and then try that again and see if more comes out. Now that I know most of it is gone out of the engine, I'll then install the tester again and see what kind of readings we get. So the gauge is showing what has to be the highest reading I've ever seen from a small engine, which looks to be about 205 psi. Now this has to be a result of there still being a trace amount of fuel and oil in the engine, but I think I got most of it out. However, once we do our valve lash adjustment, I do want to do the test again and see if the reading might be a result of the valve lash being out of tolerance instead. Now, instead of putting the engine on top dead center to do the adjustment, I'm going to turn the engine until one of the rocker arms is all the way down, then I'll check the valve lash for the loose rocker arm. Now for this one, I'm going to use the 5/1000 of an inch feeler to see if it's tight or loose in the clearance, and it turns out that it's much too loose, meaning we'll need to close up the clearance. Now just for my information, I'm going to keep trying to find out how big the clearance is, and it turns out to be an incredible 18/1000 of an inch, which is miles away from where it needs to be. After that, I'll then rotate the engine so that the other rocker arm is now loose and do the same procedure on it. And it turns out to be even worse than the other one. This is the reason why it needs to be checked once in a while, because if it's not, then one day your engine is not going to cooperate and you'll be left without a mower. Now to make your adjustments, first loosen the jam bolts in the middle of each adjusting nut, then put the 5/1000 feeler back in the clearance and turn the nut clockwise to tighten it. Now keep the feeler moving while you tighten the bolt, and once it starts to get stuck in the clearance, then you can tighten the jam bolt while holding the nut still. Once you're done with this rocker arm, then rotate the engine again to loosen the other rocker arm and do the same procedure to that one. Also, don't forget to check the clearance after you get the jam bolt tightened because it might be off after you tighten it. So after the adjustment, it turns out the compression is now a little bit lower at 187 psi, which means either there's less oil on the combustion side or having the valve lash that far out was causing the high reading. Either way, I'll do another test later on once we get the engine started and running. Hopefully we make it that far though, because as you're going to see here in a bit, things don't always go according to plan. I'll just add a bit more fuel to the tank, trying not to make a mess, and then prime the engine, and hopefully it starts and runs. Unfortunately, I did not stop the engine, it did it by itself, which is never a good thing. I was in the middle of testing out the self-propel when it stopped, so I have to wonder if the self-propel caused it. I'm going to try and restart it, but as you can see, it's not doing anything except making smoke rings from the muffler. I really hope this engine didn't break on us because I really don't want to swap out this engine. I want to keep the one that's on there right now. I can't tell you how disappointed I am right now about this engine stopping on us. In fact, something like this hasn't happened in a really long time. So now we'll have to go through the entire engine, fuel, and ignition system again to try to find out if something terrible has just happened, and if so, figure out what our next plan is for this mower. Now, if I have to, I will swap out the engine on this mower, but not having it say John Deere on the cover is going to be a real letdown, at least for me. No one else might feel that way, but that's okay. There's also the idea of trying to fix whatever's wrong with this engine, but the moment I get an OEM part, there's also going to be that chance that it's going to be way more expensive than it really needs to be. So my question is, what do you think might have happened to the engine? Do you think there's water in the fuel? Do you think the ignition coil just failed? Or do you think something else has happened to it? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.